Welcome everybody to this live China Café, which we can hold thanks to the generous hospitality of Huawei, our Chinese host. It's really wonderful. Thank you very much, with a very special thanks to Richard Spans and his team for organizing this. Thank you very much for your kind coordination of this event. It's really great to see so many familiar faces, but also very, very many new faces, young faces. It's fantastic. And my name is Lilian Kranenburg. I run the China Cafés together with Joke Bruinzeel here, and with support of the Leiden Asia Center, with a special thanks today to Emma Burgers in the back. Looking at the content of what is important today to discuss is really about zooming in on China's digital ambitions. That is why we're here. Because what are these ambitions? And what do these ambitions mean possibly for China, but more for businesses at this part of the world, at this end? Are these challenges something that we should fear or not? And what do they mean if we can't ramp up our own capabilities, our own technological capabilities? What does that say about us? And what is the role of collaboration? What should we be looking for when we're talking about the digital challenges that meet us in this new world? Indeed, if we look at what was said during the two sessions earlier this month, Premier Gert-Jan also said that it was necessary for China to further implement the innovation drive and the strategy all around it, this policy of making sure that China implements more policy to enforce and strengthen the Chinese economy. But more important, possibly also for us, is that there should be more policy to drive companies to be encouraged to implement and embrace innovation. So if that is the case, and China is actually trying to ramp up all these different capabilities, what does that mean for Western companies and for Western businesses if we can't actually deal with the enormous speed with which these technologies are introduced? It is industrial policy. How are we going to sort ourselves out? Should we collaborate? Should we be able to match up with China or not? And in fact, are some of the challenges that we're facing maybe not actually homegrown? So I'm really happy to be able to introduce to you three panelists, three distinguished speakers from the world of academia and business. We have Leah, we have Gert-Jan van Eyck, and we have Rogier Creemers. And I will go into a longer introduction to them, each and every one of them. Each speaker will have a pitch of 5 minutes, then they will be able to react to one another, and following that I will ask a few questions, but not after giving you the opportunity to raise a few questions. So, after all of this, I would like to introduce our first speaker to you, and that is Rogier Creemer. Rogier Creemer is assistant professor of China studies at the University of Leiden, where I have to actually look at my notes because it's quite impressive, and I've tried to do this by heart, but I'm sorry, I hope you'll forgive me. And you are actually leading a project on China and global cybersecurity, are you not? Yes. And all of this is funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I think what I particularly enjoyed when we were doing this preparation is that Rogier believes that Western nations are actually prone to making all sorts of biased assumptions about China's digital plans. And it's really important to make sense of what China is doing by looking through a Chinese lens. So I am also hoping that within these 5 minutes, he will be able to take some time to debunk a few notions that actually say that what China's advancement is in high technology and innovation is actually an omnipresent threat to us. And we should really look perhaps at a different way of interpreting China's advancement at this moment. So I'm going to give the floor to Rogier.
Thank you very much, and it's lovely to see people in real life. I never, sort of, wow, people have legs, feet. It's lovely to be here, and I'm just trying to get used to the sound of my own voice through the microphone. It's always a bit weird, isn't it? But what I would like to draw your attention to is indeed that fact of, certainly in my line of business, where I study Chinese technology policy, pretty much what tends to happen all the time is when people think about China and technology here in Europe and certainly in the United States, they think about two things. One is, China's a threat to us. They're trying to take over. They're trying to write the rules of the global internet and all the rest of it. And obviously, China's an authoritarian state, and everything that China does is aimed at oppressing its own population. And what I'm not going to say is that China's a liberal democracy, because it's very clearly not. But what I am going to say is that that is by far not the only thing that the Chinese government does. And what I would invite everyone to do is just think a little bit through about, we've just had the 14th five-year planning cycle for the digital world come out. And I had the dubious pleasure of translating these documents, and just one of them is over 20,000 words in translation. That gives you an idea of the scale and the depth and the breadth of policy intentions. And what I'd like to underline here are three big things that I think we need to know about the way that China is now looking at the digital future. And the first is it is moving away from a digital economic model that actually looked a lot like the Silicon Valley model of data-driven online platforms delivering projects and services. And we've seen that some people have called it a crackdown on the online industry. I disagree. I think it's a regulatory correction or a rectification, to use a traditional Chinese political term, except if you're in cryptocurrency or in educational technology, because there we have had a crackdown. But it's moving towards a different model that is far more oriented towards integrating digital technologies and the real economy. So the Chinese government has a very strong sense that the real economy is where it's at, and that the digital component needs to enliven the real economy. And obviously a lot of this has to do with the point that China's now at about 1/3 of GDP per capita in comparison to the European Union. Obviously the question for Chinese economic policymakers is where's the other 2/3 going to come from? And certainly they see as technology is a very important component of that. So that integration of digital technology and the real economy is something that we're going to see a lot of, and it's also where certainly a lot of the investment is now moving, simply because the online economy, the online platform economy has matured, and any profit you're going to make there is incremental. Second is China is going to very strongly resist financialization and speculation. It believes that financialization and speculation, as we know it in the West, lead to volatility. If there's anything that the Chinese government doesn't like, it's volatility and speculation. So what you're going to see, obviously the whole cryptocurrency sector has been banned, but what you're also going to see is much less of an emphasis on the sort of the development of fintech-based products. China believes that the role of the financial sector is to serve as a handmaiden, if that's the term I'm looking for, in a supporting role for the real economy, not as a locus for profit making and capital accumulation itself. That's a second component that we need to look at. The third component that I think we need to look at very much is sort of this idea that digital technology is very much serving to enable better delivery of government services. And yes, part of that is security surveillance related, and we should not ignore that. But it's by far not the only thing. Because there are also massive challenges that China faces. For instance, if you're clever, if you've got things like a medical degree or a teaching degree, very often you don't want to live in the countryside. It's not nice. So China has a rural brain drain problem, but people in the countryside deserve, I would argue, things like education and healthcare as much as the urbanites. So one of the things that China is looking at, that the Chinese government is looking at, is how can we use digital technology to enhance things like long-distance healthcare, long-distance education, and other forms of government services, so as to enhance the quality of life of Chinese people. And however skeptic we might be about the Chinese government in other contexts, from a purely humanitarian angle, there are some interesting things happening there. That's all I want to say.
Fantastic. Within 5 minutes. I didn't hear you debunk anything. Perhaps we can go into that later on, because that would be really good as well. I mean, you have actually addressed it slightly.
Well, very often one finds that you don't, it's very often we don't get things really wrong about China. What we do is we focus on one aspect of it and we think that that's the entire thing. And we forget that there's a whole bunch of other things as well. But, if I feel that something comes up that I think is really problematic, yes. I will. And also, as we go to the discussion section later on, feel free to throw things at me that you believe need a thorough debunking.
Thank you very much, Rogier. The second speaker of today is Gert-Jan van Eck, and he is homegrown. You have worked for Huawei since 2019 as a chief operations officer, and you're the head of public relations. And in this position, you are actually responsible for the making Huawei move in the Dutch, and especially here in Holland, making headways here in Holland with the company. You've got about 25 years of experience in digital environment, so that's a lot, I would say. And then what I thought was interesting in this preparation is that your observations about China's digital economy really focus on our own educational system. You seem to believe that the educational system isn't fully engaged yet to address the challenges of the modern or the new era. And then, of course, one of the things that you also are concerned about is the transformation to the new era. And are we going to be inclusive enough? Are we going to be able to take enough people with us? Is there going to be a gap between the haves and the have-nots, the people that do have access to modern technology at all? And then, of course, you've also mentioned one of the things that I think is important, because we said, what about the challenges? The challenges can be homegrown. And I think one of the things that you are going to address is budget shortages and labor shortage. It is a grave concern. So in this increasing society, what do you believe is important for us to get to grips with? Floor is yours.
Thank you. And to be within 5 minutes is going to be challenging on this subject. First of all, welcome in this Huawei building. I'm very grateful to have this session over here, and it's great to see you here. We opened this a year ago with the intention to have an open platform to receive everybody here and to show the broadness of the activities we have. That's first of all. I've been working already since a long time in technology, and as a child I was intrigued by technology and humankind, especially the positive effects of technology on humankind is my driver in my daily work. And I regard myself and colleagues here in a very, very special time frame, actually, because a lot of things come together, bad and good. And I think it's a little bit loud. At the moment, we're confronted with extremely challenging circumstances. Climate, healthcare, education, transport. The world is from an open place, geopolitical, limited at this moment. We're all aware of that. There's a bit of a buzz, I believe, in the sound going around. Yeah, thank you. And I do believe that despite the fear and the cynicism technology can bring to people, understandably, because it often impacts lives in a way never been done before, it offers great opportunity also to address the big challenges we are faced with today. And that's what I believe and what I'm driven by. At the same time, we see, especially in the Western society, compared to the Eastern society, that the speed of change, the access, the speed of change, the acceptance of technology changes, and the way to deal with it are totally different. If you look at the different operating system acceptance, for instance, in Asia, it's done within a very limited time frame, and people learn to work with it quickly, accept it and use it, etc. In schools, in healthcare, etc. Whereas in the West, it's quite difficult to adapt from Apple to, let's say, an Android system, for instance. And that's all to do with how fast we're confronted with changes and willing to accept it. The Dutch Rijksarchitect, how do you call that in English? The
National architect.
National architect, who's also responsible for the design of society in some way, has written a small book where he's explaining that the attitude at this moment in the Netherlands and the West at this moment is actually limiting the way we can address the big problems in society. Because we are driven more by fear and, like I said, by cynicism than by the creativity, openness, and willingness to explore. And that's a pity because there's so much to offer. And I'm working in a company with 110,000 people in development, and there's many companies in this world working like that. Not waking up in the morning to build something which is a threat to humankind. Most of the time, I would say. They're getting up to improve lives, to improve the life of you and me. And I do believe that's also the case in the company I'm working for 6 years now, but in general, that is the case for companies. When I look at the education system in China, when I look at the adaptation of technology in China, it's the way people have drive. There's a big difference at this moment, and I was just having a talk before this session. If I look at my children and the educational system, they're not stimulated to get the best out of them. Once they hit the university, Rogier is becoming better. My oldest son was so delighted to be in university because finally he had the opportunity to explore and to be passionate about things, etc. And that's a pity because it's wasting a couple of years which could be used dramatically. Second point is that digital is not included too much in education yet, and I think it's a fundamental part of education as much as anything else. The good thing at the moment is, and maybe I'm out of time already, this new government has finally defined a digital paragraph in their manifest, and that's a new thing. The way it's implemented, it's still a bit fragmented, but it's a good thing that there's attention now specifically for embracing the opportunities of digital towards the benefit of humankind and society. And that's giving me a lot of energy to go forth on that path. And I'm looking forward to do that together with the academia, because I do believe, and that's my last point, that cooperation between companies and academic environment is beneficial, maybe even crucial, and international cooperation as well. But we lack a framework in the Netherlands on how we can do that, how we can do that safely, what is allowed and what is not allowed, and where do you have to pay attention, because you also have to protect certain things. I do understand that. That's my point.
Thank you very much, Gert-Jan. I think it's really important for us to realize, perhaps that's also important ingredient for today, is that perhaps we are not able to adapt enough, or we don't actually see the urgency with which we should address this new challenge. So maybe this is something for later on.
Later on.
Yeah. Leah Lee, who is working for Seedlink. Thank you very much for being here today. It's great. Seedlink, for the ones who don't know what Seedlink is a scale-up, a technological scale-up, which develops artificial intelligence to find people to be matched with the right job and vice versa. I think what really is important part of you is that you've worked and studied in France, you've studied all sorts of different subjects, you have studied international business, but also innovation and entrepreneurship here in Holland. And you've also looked at the differences between Chinese and European companies in how they actually look at incubators, how they start up. So there is actually a nice match to be made. Where are the differences? Can we learn from each other? And how do you actually see the different ways in which companies are addressing the new age of digital transformation?
Right. Thank you. I would like to thank for our lovely host Huawei today, and the organization from Leiden Asia Center and China Café. Thanks for having me here. I think I would like to start my point of view from taking a look to review what has happened during the most recent decades. If we look at what it has been facilitating, both by technology and innovation, it has always been through global collaboration. And in that sense, I do not see the point of us to go into a tunnel vision to make things smaller and only do it locally. And it's also that you want to tap into talents, you want to tap into bright minds and bright people, bright teams that comes from everywhere. And at the end of the day, if you want to drive change, progress, you need people, good people. And also just to look at the labor market nowadays, it is also highly impacted with the change within the world nowadays. How when we want to identify what drives change, it is always comes to how within the progress, that is the difficulty to recognize, identify talent. It's always been a problem, and now we kind of are going to even narrowing it down. It's not the way to go, and it's also something that Seedlink has been working on for the past 7-8 years now. It's that we want to look into talent in a different way, that we don't look into what's on your resume, where are you coming from, but we look into something really specific. It's your language use, and we try to link your subconscious pattern with the business impact that you could actually make. And from that sense, Seedlink is very lucky that we are born and raised in China as a company, but now we're also a global company now. We work in 13 countries to help deal with this difficulty to identify talents. And that's something we have been working on for so long. Now we also see that if we want to look at for example, the speed of development, how the adaptation of technology, the interest in innovation, it's just different, as in it's on another stage in China, as in how you say, to give an example, at the very early stage of our company, our CEO, Rena Houston, she went on knocking on so many doors in Shanghai with almost no product. It was just an Excel sheet with ranking result. That was it. But after finding 2 people telling her, oh, I think you actually have something there, that's all you need, right? Just people that believe in you. And after that they actually adapted it very fastly, like much faster than here. And it's also the approach when you're in China and you say everything more from a opportunity perspective rather than based on risk, on uncertainties. And now you see that China has everything in China could just leapfrog. It leapfrog to the next stage. It goes to the newest very fast with super forgiving consumers. And for the fact that it's the aspect of how China, with its own innovation ecosystem, it's hundreds of millions of hyper-adaptive and hyper-adoptive consumers that makes China so globally competitive today. And for the fact that China, for the innovation that you want to implement, you actually need people to have the willingness to use it. Otherwise, how can you judge the innovation? So I think on that front, China has no peer. And also on a personal note, if I look in my daily job and I look into how my time was spent into for example, the lead time I have with companies in China and companies in Europe, I spend 50% less time with my contacts in China because the adaptiveness and the willingness they have to be willing to try new things. But that's also what makes it easier for European companies. They are actually, once they are with you, they are more loyal because in China you also see they are also willing to try something else all the time.
I think a few elements that were neatly brought together. Competitiveness, very important. Of course, we like to compete here too, but it's done in a different way. There must be sort of links of culture, being willing indeed to adapt quickly, maybe taking risk, but we do that in both sides perhaps also. And I think a point you often make, Rogier, is that why do we keep on comparing the whole time? Why is it us and them?